Hey everyone, just a quick video for you today about the Soviet Union's role in World War I and II to look at this from a different lens and a little bit of backstory for you. So once upon a time, I found some really cheap airline tickets flying from Chicago O'Hare to Moscow. Now, Moscow was never on my bucket list, but for the price of the tickets in the $300 range, we booked those tickets. And so we went off to Moscow. Now, while we were there, just by pure accident, they were celebrating Victory in Europe Day, which would be the end of World War II. And so there was big festivities. Putin had a huge military parade planned, and I had a lot of alerts kind of coming from the embassy and other things. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Soviet Union's role in World War I and II so that you guys kind of see this other perspective, and I'll come back to that story in just a little bit. So let's kind of cruise along here and do some review from what you've been learning. So World War I, we know that the leaders of Russia were the Romanov dynasty. They were on the side of the Allies. During World War I, we have the revolution, the Russian Revolution, which basically, because of massive deaths in World War I, over 100, that's not 100, 1.7 million deaths, and starvation, and the Russian Revolution, they leave the war. Okay. And so, because of this peace treaty with the new Bolshevik government and the Central Powers, they are no longer players in World War I. So they're gone and they're dealing with their own business back home in Russia as they turn into the Soviet Union. So as we kind of go forward, we see that there's major changes in Russia. We see the rise of Vladimir Lenin and the rise of the Soviet Union and communism. So that's going to happen between the years of 1917 to 1924. After the death of Lenin, we're going to see some other kind of provisional governments and then the rise of Joseph Stalin, who is going to be the leader of the country from 1929 to 1953. That goes through World War II as you guys are looking at the dates. So we know in World War II, Stalin created a totalitarian government. They were communist, obviously. And we also know at the beginning of World War II, they signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler. So they are on Team Hitler at the beginning of the war. Or rather, they are saying that we're not going to be aggressive towards each other, but aren't necessarily involved. They just supported Germany's efforts, as we looked in the other video. So we see, though, that this we have a backstabbing situation where Germany then invades the Soviet Union in 1941. This is known as Operation Barbarossa, and we see that Germany desires for the western lands of the Soviet Union for their goal, as you guys saw in your reading, for more Lieberstraßen. I'm not German. Actually, that's kind of false. If you track the DNA, it says I'm actually kind of German. But either way, living space. I took Spanish, everyone. So they are looking for more living space, and that's why they kind of backstabbed Stalin and moved into the Soviet Union. And so that's kind of where this all starts. So now we see that the Soviet Union switches sides, and now they are on the Allied side. They are fighting alongside of Britain. They're fighting along with the U.S. They're fighting alongside of France, or what's kind of remaining of France at this time. So what was the cost to the Soviet Union? Or really, what were the costs to those living in the Soviet Union? So Leningrad, as you guys see how they named cities after basically famous Soviet leaders. Leningrad, as you see up there, is at the same spot of, St. Petersburg. So Leningrad, now today known as St. Petersburg, is going to be this really long 900-day siege, resulting in the death of some 1 million of the city's civilians. In the AMSCO book, it talked about how this lasted over 3 years. It led to the deaths of a million Soviet men, women, and children. Total war. Remember, like everyone's involved in the war effort. But they are defending that city. They're losing people, but that's the big part here. Okay, so if you see a little bit of the geography here, we kind of see in the middle area of your screen Moscow, and then to the bottom Stalingrad, and we'll kind of talk about that next. So then as you kind of continue on down here, we're going to see that a major other offensive is going to be Stalingrad. If you want to write one thing down about Stalingrad, this is going to be a turning point in the war where as they're trying to defend Leningrad, we're seeing that Stalingrad also is really kind of a big offensive, and they're trying to defend that city. But as we kind of joked before, this is going to be a tide turning event because they are going to attack during the harsh winter months, which puts a disadvantage to the Germans and an advantage as we see to the Russians. And we see that they just kind of keep throwing people. Like if you read like firsthand accounts, like this stuff is gruesome and they're just throwing people on the front lines. And so again, massive, massive amounts of people are dying in these events as we are looking at Stalingrad. And we see that this is kind of a momentum shifter. Okay. So we then will see what the kind of end of the war is going to be looking at is we're going to see what's known as the race to Berlin or the Battle of Berlin. So we see that the Soviet forces are on the eastern side of Europe pushing west towards Berlin. And then we see the Allied forces, Great Britain, France, the United States, and others pushing towards Berlin. And it's about equal distance, 800 miles either way, as they are trying to close in on Berlin. Now, the Soviets are going to, quote, win this race. You can ask different people, and so some people would say that the Soviets won because we let them win, which sounds very, very American in their viewpoints there. But the idea that they're pushing forward towards Berlin and we let them take the brunt of the fighting and all the things involved in the death count. But either way, this is what happens. But the Soviets are the people that arrive at Berlin first. The Soviets are the people that really cause Hitler not to want to be taken and commit suicide. The Soviets get there first, okay? And so that's a key thing to know. Back to my story from the beginning of the video. When I was in Russia, in Moscow, you can see that on the map. When I was in Moscow, I was watching as they had lots of Victory Day celebrations, and what was on Russia Today on their TV was talking about how American kids did not realize the price that the Soviets and the Russians paid during World War II. And they said that American kids, all they know about is the Holocaust, where they think that the U.S. was involved because of the Holocaust, which in fact, as we'll learn later in this unit, the U.S. had really no idea, especially the American people. That was not a cause for the U.S. getting involved. The cause for the United States getting involved, in fact, was Pearl Harbor. It was not because of good will towards us to end the Holocaust. But that's what people in Russia thought. So I thought, none of my kids think this until I came back. And on the test for this unit, when I asked a question like that, kind of a little bit of a hint, but I asked that question. And you know what people told me? Exactly what the Russians said American kids believed. It was because of the Holocaust, and that's why we got involved. And so I now take time to teach this because of this very reason. So we see that on May 8th, 1945, it marks the formal acceptance by the Allies to the end of World War II, an unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. So that is known as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. And then we see this kind of article that you guys read in the discussion of don't forget how the Soviet Union saved the world from Hitler. So I just want to I'm giving some love over to the Russians for a little bit here, just so that they can see and we can recognize their role in this war. On the other side, so let's say the war is done in the European theater, we're going to switch over to the Pacific theater. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but just so you guys know, we see this island hopping method of conducting the war to answer learning target, I believe 7.7. You can also add that a little bit if you guys are filling out the comparison sheet from the study guide listed in this module. And we also see that they are, as they're island hopping, we're going to see that the atomic bomb is new technology that is used during this war. And so some of the biggest battles that you've probably heard of is Okinawa or Iwo Jima. And then we see that the atomic bomb was first used in Hiroshima. And then we see a few days later in Nagasaki. And these are the events that will then end the war in the Pacific, ending in Victory in Japan Day on August 14th, my birthday, 1945, way before I was born. It was announced that Japan had surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, effectively ending World War II. So as you guys fill in the chart and you guys are looking at the comparisons to how this ends, we see there's two distinct theaters, and we see for sure, and I know you guys know this, that really the Soviets were instrumental in turning the tide in the war, but also racing to Berlin.